Good morning, and thank you for tuning in again. And I'm with my good friend Mike Ivey, and we're here talking about many interesting topics, and especially around the area of sustainability. And we're talking about all the different ingredients that go into becoming sustainable people, running sustainable businesses, and changing the way that we do things from one type of actions to another. And today we really want to focus on the whole issue of our belief sets or our thinking or how we change our thinking. So I'm going to throw the ball to you, Mike, to kick us off in terms of, what do we have to do when it comes to our thinking, especially around issues of sustainability?
Great. Well, I think the big thing is mindset, and we need to have helpful beliefs that cause us to accelerate in the direction of making the world a more sustainable place. And for me, number one mindset that we probably need to cultivate within organizations and within the world is the fact that each of us can and should make a difference. When I watch the news and I see the disasters happening and the statistics around sustainability, the loud voice that goes off in my head is, can me, Mike Ivey, actually make any difference to what seems to be an unstoppable momentum towards a fairly destructive outcome?
Yeah.
But when we realize that every small action, trillions of little actions by billions of people can actually make a huge difference, we are probably going to see some turnaround beginning to take place.
Absolutely. I think we're all very aware of that sinking feeling. I was listening to the radio only yesterday, and it was a fairly desperate radio broadcast saying they don't think much has changed and the world is heading for disaster, and trying to get the world to pull in the same direction to get this 1.5-degree set point. And I have to say it was a sinking feeling of what can I do? I mean, what possibly could I do to help this situation? It feels just immaterial that I put my plastic in the plastic recycling, and I put my recycling boxes out, and that can feel almost just like I'm not really doing enough. I often thought of the guy that has the starfish and throws the starfish into the sea, and he says, well, everyone counts.
Yes.
I think, but there's a big difference between the guy that throws the starfish in once, or the guy that goes to the beach every single day and constantly throws another starfish back into the sea. And I think the difference has to be having a sustained belief that every single thing we do every single day ultimately will make a difference, right?
Yeah.
And I find that the hardest thing to sustain. Talk to anyone who wants to lose weight at the beginning of the year. They'll forego the beef burger and the chips for a couple of days, but if they don't see immediate change, that wanes, and ultimately they fall back into old patterns of behavior. So how do we get ourselves out of this? How do we deal with those really powerful emotions that really, we're insignificant and we can't really make that difference? How do we deal with that?
Yeah. Look, I think the big thing is we often don't do small things because we don't see the benefit right now. So even if I go for a run today is not going to make me fit, but running for 30, 40, 50 days in a row, on day 50, I'm probably beginning to feel some difference. And I think it's the same with the small acts that we do consistently. They begin to multiply. We spoke about that 1% the last time, but they begin to multiply. But here's something: if I believe that my small things make a difference, I'm beginning to give permission to other people around me to do the same. And I think that's something that we often miscalculate or don't necessarily understand. Every single day, you and I are giving each other permission to behave a certain way. When I don't recycle, it's actually sharing with other people that's okay for them not to do it. When I do, it might not impact everyone around me, but it could impact the next guy who impacts the next guy, and it begins to become a bit of a wave. I think one way of looking at this would be to do the maths, and it would go something like this. If we had to get 1 million people in the world to radically change their lifestyle, or we had to get 1 billion people to do one small thing in a better, more helpful way. Which of those two are going to have the bigger impact? And the answer is it's going to be the billion people who all do something small.
But you know, the cynics amongst us, of which sometimes I am one, you know, says I can't even get 5 people to do this in my organization, let alone a billion. Mike, you know, how are we going to do this? I was thinking, so in my previous role, in the company I used to run, we put equipment on big motors, and by using this equipment properly, you could save power. So as an example, we put this on a cooling tower that we set the temperature. Let's say it's 21 degrees, and so it's like a thermostat, right? So it would cut in and cut out around 21 degrees. But what we would find is occasionally the engineers would turn that thermostat up 22, 23 degrees. Now, it's just like you said, they didn't feel any material difference other than perhaps the water got a little bit warmer. But there was behind the scenes in what they couldn't see, a material change in the amounts of power that was being consumed. And so what we created was a feedback loop that whenever a change was made on the thermostat, a text message was sent that demonstrated in rands and cents and pounds and pence how much that change was going to cost them. So there was immediate feedback to them around each incremental change. And that drove a change in behavior. Now,
Yes.
how could we provide better immediate feedback around these small incremental changes that we choose to make? How, you know, perhaps you might have a few ideas around that. Take your running story, for instance. I know one thing. I'm using an app at the moment, and every day I'm putting in what I'm eating, and it's telling me how many calories I've consumed against how many calories I've burnt. So there is some immediate feedback, and it tells you that if you carry on this trajectory, you're either going to be super fit or super fat. You know, I think for me, if there was a way of getting immediate feedback around every action, it would improve the performance. What do you think?
I agree with you, and you know, sometimes we need to, even for our own personal lives, just create feedback in terms of all the right choices that you make. For example, I heard this great story about a guy who, brilliant salesman, but every call he makes, he moves a paperclip from the left to the right of his desk. So he sees the paperclips building of the calls that he's making. And I think for us as well, you know, every time we make a right decision in the place of sustainability, it's just feedback to ourselves that we're making difference.
Right,
and
right.
When I make a difference in line with my value set, I begin to feel good about myself.
Right.
And I begin to know that I am making a difference. And then I think for organizations, they can be doing that at a collective level, like you've been saying. So the feedback loop is going to be very, very important in the world of sustainability. But it's just showing and reminding people that, hey, we've saved so much electricity, or we've saved so much paper, or our carbon footprint has gone down by so much. And I like what you're saying. It can become very, very motivating to just feed the mindset of our actions are making a difference.
Right, right. So quantifying even the throwing the starfish into the sea, trying to quantify that in some meaningful way. I know that we've talked many times in workshops about the compelling scoreboard.
Yes.
And that, you know, imagine going to a football match and trying to watch the match without any scoreboard. So there was no one counting the goals, no one counting how long the game was running for. The game in itself would become meaningless because you wouldn't know. You know, the game is interesting because it's got a defined time in which to play and a scoreboard keeping count. And I think that's kind of what we're saying, right? That if we want to make our small actions meaningful, we need to give it some kind of scoring, or we need to give it some kind of feedback to ourselves. Is that right?
Yes, I agree with you totally. You know, unless the game is just to have fun or whatever. But we know certainly when it comes to climate change, when it comes to sustainability, we've got to move beyond fun to serious. This is urgent stuff. And urgent stuff definitely needs the scoreboard to show us how we're doing. And I suppose, just going back to your point, Davey, is the one challenge we have is that the scoreboard is just sharing us some really blatant, not so nice news. Like you say, it can actually sink us. And we want the reality of that scoreboard, but we also want the notion that me as an individual or my organization is actually getting a bit better at this. And every act taken in the right direction is one less act taken in the wrong direction.
Oh, that's very, very good. Very, very good. So, and I think to answer your point about whatever we do, we are an influencer.
Yes.
Whether we will, if we don't choose to influence positively, we will by very nature be influencing negatively. So leaving the light on in the office as the last person out is important to turn that off, even if no one's noticing, right? Making sure that machine that's running whilst everyone's on coffee break and being the person to turn the machine off, or at least bring it to the attention of the engineering staff that they could have it turned off, is important. And I think that's the messaging, isn't it? The starfish being thrown back in, turning the light switch off, or putting the paper in the recycling bin rather than the plastics bin. Insignificant as it may feel, ultimately does make the difference.
Yes, yeah. And I think it's really saying to people, we're either going to lead this change or we're going to become victims within the change that comes that we don't want.
That's so true.
Yeah, so it really is, and as I'm talking to you, there's alarm bells going off in my head as to just all the different places where I can do so much better. But possibly underneath that is just this compelling, doubting voice which says, does it matter? And I've got to start answering that as yes, I can make a difference. We must make a difference. And we've got to start feeding that mindset. Billions of actions taken in the right direction lead to some impact in the environment.
Absolutely, Mike. I think, as we wrap up this podcast today, I think one of the dangers that we have to be careful of in organizations is that we don't bring mixed messaging into our messaging, certainly even into our thinking. I think we really do need to ask ourselves, do we really believe it? Do we really believe that the world needs change? Do we really believe that my actions can make that change? And I think we need to keep focusing our thinking, focusing our minds, and farming out those doubts that creep in. And I think it's those doubts that erode the drive or the urgency to bring change. And I think certainly when we talk to organizations about keeping positive messaging going, to make sure that we reduce the amount of misinformation that we allow into our organizations or even into our own lives, that erode that willingness to change. It's been great chatting again, Mike. And we will keep talking beliefs, change, incremental change, and together that we can make these differences in the world that we live in. Many thanks for your time again.
Thanks, Dave.